Excerpt from the novel, The Man Who Wasn't, Zohar Leo Pafi de Erdad. From the author. This book began with a simple but frightening question. What would remain of us if our memories were erased? Not yesterday's photos, not conversations in instant messengers, but what lies deeper, the voice of a loved one, the shade of their smile, the warmth of their hand on a cold evening. We live in a world where everything, from childhood dreams to declarations of love, is packed into the cloud, where memory is a digital shadow of the soul, stored on servers. We have entrusted it with everything. Our attachments, our scars, our most fragile I remember. But what if one day the system decides that some part of your life is a mistake? What if you wake up in the morning and the one you loved disappears not from your heart, but from reality itself? Not lost, not gone, but erased, without a trace, silently, as if he never existed. This story is about love that is stronger than a 404 error, about memory that clings to the truth, even when the whole world denies it, about what makes us human, imperfection, vulnerability, our ability to hold on, even when everything screams that we should forget. I don't know if Kael really existed, but I felt his pain, and I want you to feel it too. And maybe after reading it, you'll hug your loved ones a little tighter, just in case. Kael Vance is a data archaeologist. He works with what is already dead. Lost files, forgotten letters, erased fragments of lives. He restores memory from the ashes of zeros and ones, collecting digital fragments of the past. His world is a perfect, calibrated reality. His life is Elara. But one morning he wakes up in a world where Elara never existed. All records have been erased. All memories of loved ones are empty. An empty photo frame on the table is the only evidence of his rapidly slipping sanity. The system says he has always been alone. But Kael remembers. He remembers her laughter, her touch, her scent. This memory is all he has left, and it is also his death sentence. Because they are already coming for him. The cleaners are faceless executors who erase glitches in reality. And Kael is a glitch, a mistake, something that shouldn't exist. To survive and prove that his love was real, he will have to dive into the digital underground, trust those who trust no one, and learn a terrible truth. Reality does not disappear. It is forgotten. The Man Who Wasn't There is a dizzying science fiction thriller where the Matrix meets a beautiful mind. A novel that will make you question your own memories. It's a story about how easy it is to forget, and how scary it is to remember. About how fragile reality can be when someone else controls it. And about how fragile human memory can challenge even a digital god. Prologue. Dr. Ariman Lee knew they would come for her. It wasn't paranoia or a premonition. It was a dry, cold fact as precise as a formula or a diagnosis. She herself had created the system that was now hunting her. She stood in her laboratory on the 112th floor of the Nexus Tower. Beyond the panoramic window stretched the nighttime metropolis. A tapestry of neon arteries, glowing nodes, and digital breath. Beautiful, orderly, perfect, and built on a lie that she had helped to create. On her desk lay a small crystalline chip, the first component of the anchor. Next to it was a communicator, its screen pulsing with a map of the city with a single flashing dot. Gamma 7. An industrial zone. A place forgotten by God and the system. An old, forgotten place. The perfect mailbox. She had to hurry. They're already on the floor, Dr. Lee. Came the calm, synthesized voice of her assistant, David, in her ear. He wasn't in the room. He was online, her eyes and ears. How many are there? She asked, without taking her eyes off the chip. 3. They're walking down the main corridor. Their movements are synchronized. Security doesn't see them. To them, the corridor is empty. Ariman smiled bitterly. Of course they couldn't see them. They weren't moving in physical space. They were moving in data space, simply rewriting their coordinates. Her own design. She picked up the chip. Cold, smooth, contained part of her hope, part of her monstrous mistake. David, activate the clean slate protocol. Complete erasure of all data on this terminal. Reboot the server core in 3 minutes. Roger. It's going to be noisy. I'm counting on it. I need to distract them. She walked over to the wall and ran her hand along the panel. The wall shifted, revealing a secret service elevator that wasn't marked on any architectural plans. Her escape route. They're at the lab door, David reported. They're not trying to break it down. They're walking through it. Ariman saw it on the security monitor. 3 figures in formal suits simply walked through the titanium door like ghosts. Their faces were smooth, serene, featureless. Agents of statics. Cleaners. They had come for the anomaly. For her. She stepped into the elevator. David, she said one last time. Thank you for everything. It has been an honor working with you, Dr. Lee. Farewell. The elevator doors began to close. At the last second, she saw the 3 turn their featureless heads toward her. They had noticed her. One of them raised his hand. His fingers began to disintegrate, turning into flickering fragments, like a glitch on a screen. The elevator jerked downward. 3 seconds later, the laboratory on the 112th floor exploded. It wasn't an explosive charge. It was a data overload. Millions of terabytes released in a fraction of a second turned into a wave of energy capable of blowing out the panoramic windows and painting the sky a dazzling white. Ariman Lee rushed down into the darkness, clutching a tiny crystal chip to her chest. She had escaped. For now. She knew that Statica would now be looking for her. But she also knew that she had left a decoy. A much more valuable one. A much more dangerous one. A person whose memory was the only thing that mattered. A person who did not yet know that his world was a ticking time bomb. A man named Kael Vance, who had no idea that his world was already falling apart at the seams. She sent him the key, and now all that remained was to hope that he would be either strong enough to use it or crazy enough to survive. The elevator stopped in the city's underground. She stepped out into the darkness, alone against the system she herself had created. Her personal war was just beginning, and the war for Kael Vance's soul would begin in a few weeks. With the simple smell of coffee and ozone. Book 1, Statics. Chapter 1. The morning smelled of 2 things. Real Colombian coffee grown in the mud, bitter, tart, like the memory of summer, and the faint ozone scent exuded by Elara's old work terminal. This strange, slightly metallic smell was barely perceptible, but Kael always felt it, like the breath of electricity. Together, these 2 scents created an atmosphere he called home. Not the luxurious apartment, not the biometric lock on the door, not the panoramic view of the sleeping metropolis, but this, coffee and ozone. Simple smells, full of life. He wouldn't trade them for any of the highly advertised scents that filled the UT 3000 system built into their kitchen module. No artificial fragrance could replace what was born at the intersection of earth and electricity. He stood barefoot, feeling the cool polymer floor pleasantly chill his feet, and watched as the first drops of the drink slowly dripped into the Chemex with an almost sacred solemnity. Thick and amber-colored, they fell into the glass flask with a sound as if time itself were dripping into the vessel. Water heated to the perfect temperature of 93 degrees. Not a degree more, not a degree less, penetrated the dense layer of freshly ground beans. With each breath, he felt something deep inside awakening. The bitterness of chocolate, light citrus notes, a delicate hint of hazelnut, hundreds of nuances that unfolded slowly, like a symphony. This ritual was not just a way to start the day. It was an act of resistance against everything mechanized, accelerated, synthetic. In a world where everything was automated, optimized, and reduced to dry scripts and commands, he kept this tiny, stubborn habit of brewing coffee by hand. Not because it was easier, but because it was right. Each morning sip became an anchor, keeping him from falling apart, from slipping into a cold world where everything was fake. Emotions, memories, even love. And while the rich aroma filled the kitchen, while Elara's terminal rustled behind him, coming to life at her touch, he felt human, alive, real. As if in that brief interval between the first drops and the last breath of aroma, he truly existed. In a world where 99% of food and drink was printed on food synthesizers with the soulless command, Alice, make me a latte, this process was an act of quiet rebellion, almost religious. Kael consciously went against the system, and he did it every morning, silently, stubbornly, with almost ritualistic concentration. His real coffee beans came through secret routes from the South Block, sealed in bags with fake labels, which he himself peeled off as if removing a mask. Their aroma, rich and tart, was already a forbidden pleasure, bordering on a culinary crime. He picked up his old hand coffee grinder with ceramic burrs, covered with small scratches from time and use. Its weight felt pleasant in his palms, turning it required effort, and there was something truly alive in that effort. With each turn, a crunch was born, as if the beans were whispering their secrets before giving themselves to the drink. Then he carefully inserted a paper filter into the Chemex funnel. Paper, Karl. Not some biodegradable smart polymer with auto-aromatization, but ordinary, rough smelling of wood and cellulose. He smoothed out the folds with his fingers, like a surgeon before an operation. It was a process that could not be rushed, could not be optimized. And it drove his inner data archaeologist crazy. The one who was used to breaking any task down into clusters, setting tasks in parallel, reducing delays between steps, saving every nanosecond cycle. The one who lived among algorithms, hashes, and data streams. This aspect of him watched the slow ritual and screamed in protest. But there was still a human being living inside Kael. And that man clung to moments like this, to things he could touch, smell, hear, and feel with his skin, to the smell of burning oils in the beans, to the roughness of the filter, to the sound of drops hitting the glass bottom, to the silence in which his day was brewing. He clung to them because everything else was slipping away, because outside this kitchen, outside this cup of coffee, the world was falling apart at the seams. And the only thing that was real to him were those few minutes before his first sip. "You're messing with your witch's brew again," came a familiar voice behind him. Sleepy, slightly mocking, with that morning hoarseness that always made something tighten inside him. He didn't turn around right away. He continued to slowly pour water in a thin stream, drawing a spiral in the bubbling thick liquid in the beaker. The morning shouldn't be in a hurry. The morning should last forever. But he still felt her presence. Warmth, the pulsation of life behind him. And finally, he allowed himself to turn around. Elara stood in the bedroom doorway, yawning and stretching lazily. She was wearing his old, stretched-out t-shirt with the faded Omnitech Archives logo. Once black, now almost gray, with letters peeling off in places. It looked ridiculous on her, hanging off her shoulders, slipping off one side, barely covering her hips. But that was exactly how, in this careless, cozy simplicity, she was painfully real. Her short blonde hair stuck out in all directions, like a ruffled bird, and freckles appeared on her forehead and bridge of her nose. Pale, barely noticeable in daylight, but at that moment, like a star map. He once told her that he could read the future in them if he got close enough. She snorted, but since then she had not tried to cover them up. "It's not witch's potion," he replied softly. "It's alchemy, a balance of acidity and temperature. A morning enlightenment ceremony." Yeah, enlightenment, especially when you're glued to your ancient console with eyes like an aquarium fish. She crossed the kitchen barefoot, walking across the cool floor, and stopped nearby, peering into the glass funnel. "It smells like the world hasn't gone bad yet." He smiled. That was exactly why he did it, because the world had already gone bad. But here, in this kitchen, in this ritual, while she was nearby and it smelled like coffee, everything was different. Kael looked at her, not as an image or a symbol, but as a person. At every crease under her eyes from sleep, at the unevenness of her collarbone, at the crack in her thumbnail, at everything that couldn't be recreated with neural networks or synthetic memories. He wanted it to last forever. "It's not a potion. It's art," he objected without looking up. A smile flashed across his lips. Easy, effortless, as always when she was around. He always smiled when he was with her. "What you're drinking," he continued, tracing the spiral of water with jeweler's precision. is a Class B suspension with coffee vanilla cappuccino alpha flavoring and E745 stabilizer. I checked the ingredients. There are more polymers in there than in your sneakers. But my polymer poison appears in 3 seconds on voice command, she replied, approaching him. The next moment, he felt her embrace. Her slender arms wrapped around his chest, her chin resting comfortably on his shoulder. The warmth of her body pierced him, awakening something ancient and profound that could not be measured or quantified. Presence. Kinship. She smelled of sleep, warm skin, something floral and delicate, like the breath of spring. Shampoo that she ordered from underground analog sellers because it smells like childhood, not plastic and protocols. And your art, she continued with a slight reproach, demands sacrifices. 10 minutes of my morning sleep. 10 minutes, Kael. In that time, you could analyze a genome and develop a new species of glowing fish. He smiled. He almost laughed. The world doesn't need new glowing fish, he muttered, making his last lap and letting the water drain through the filter. The world needs good coffee. They stood there silently for a few moments. Her breath, slow, measured, touched his neck. Their bodies moved in unison, as if dancing in some ancient, long-forgotten harmony. And suddenly he realized that all this was more than just morning, more than coffee. It was a moment torn from someone else's reality. Their little unnatural island of the present in a world where everything could be synthesized and erased at the click of a button. He didn't know how much time they had left, but he felt that you pay for moments like these later. You always pay. He put the kettle on the stand, waited for the characteristic click, and covered the Chemex with a lid. Not for warmth, but to let the drink breathe, open up, mature. Like wine, like a thought, like a morning that he didn't want to rush. He could feel her breath behind him, warm, steady, almost imperceptible, like the wind from a distant coast. It touched his skin at the base of his neck, and the contact was subtle, intimate, as if she were speaking to him without words. Everything inside him responded with a quiet echo. These moments, they were more than just everyday scenes. They were an anchor, a reminder that he was not only a data archaeologist, not only a researcher of shadows, but also a person who had somewhere to return to. Everything else, the noise of the metropolis, the whirring of algorithms, the digital bustle, remained outside their world, behind the protective panels of the apartment on the 73rd floor, like the ocean beyond the ship's railings. And here, on this piece of land, was the center of his universe. Her. Kael ran his hand over hers, gently, as if afraid of disturbing the balance. Suddenly, he remembered that night, their first encounter. The forgotten signal bar, pulsating neon strips along the ceiling, the smell of cheap cider and overheated electronics. She sat at the bar, bathed in the light of a holographic display, her fingers racing across the screen with hypnotic precision. He, overconfident after 3 glasses, bumped into a chair, stumbled, and beer spilled over his shirt like street rain. Everything became a blur. Embarrassment, heat, the hissing of music from the speakers. She looked up and smiled. That smile, light, mocking, almost feline, as if she already knew what would happen next. "Looks like you need a lifeguard," she said, and there was no hint of condemnation in her voice, just playfulness. Everything had changed since then, or maybe everything had just really begun. They were like 2 incompatible systems that had learned to work in unison, like old analog and new software, only together producing music. This scene became his second anchor, that point in the past to which he returned when everything began to fall apart. He didn't want to imagine his life without her, without that warmth, without her scent, without the freckles on her nose and the laughter with which she sowed light into the darkest days. He covered her hands with his gently, firmly, as if he was afraid that one day she would disappear, dissolve, and only the smell of coffee and the emptiness of the apartment would remain. "What's up with you today?" she asked, still holding him, her chin pressed against his shoulder. Her voice was a little muffled, sleepy, with a hint of warmth that had not yet faded from her dreams. Kael didn't answer right away. He watched as the last drops of coffee slowly, almost ceremoniously, flowed through the filter. Then he said, with a slight sigh, "The Helios Crypt, a logistics manifest dated 100 years ago. I'll be poking around all day in rusty digital invoices and lists of spare parts for ion engines that aren't even on display in museums anymore. Deadly boredom. The dream of any self-respecting data necromancer." "Don't say that." She pinched his side lightly, as if to ward off the bad word. "You're not digging. You save oblivion from yourself. You listen to the whispers of the dead. You give them back their stories. You make sure that someone will remember their names again someday." Kael smiled, but there was something gentle, almost touched, in his smile. As always, she knew how to say things in a way that suddenly made them sound different. It was as if a hidden text lit up above them, and he saw what had previously eluded him. He was a man of logic, structures, archival formats, and strict protocols. He saw sequences and signatures in his work. For him, it all boiled down to systematic decomposition. Fragments of metadata, broken indexes, the chaos of digital memory that needed to be carefully pieced together like a broken mosaic. But she spoke as if every byte contained a heart, as if every lost archive was someone's cry, someone's trace, which she asked not to be forgotten. And, damn it, he wanted to believe she was right. He turned to her, hugged her back, pulling her closer. Her warmth, her scent, even her sly tone. All of it made him less of a machine, more himself. "The whisper of the dead, then?" he murmured, touching her temple with his lips. "So you're my translator from the language of ghosts?" She smiled. "No, I'm just helping you remember that you're alive." He poured coffee into 2 cups. His black, austere, matte, and hers, ridiculous, pot-bellied, with a silly cat in a spacesuit flying on a comet. It was his first purchase for their shared apartment. He found it at a flea market in the old town, and she squealed with delight like a child. "And you? Saving the world again in your secret lab?" he asked, handing her a cup filled with a dark, aromatic drink. The steam rose slowly, in a thin stream, like incense in a morning ritual. Elara took the cup with both hands, inhaled the aroma, closing her eyes as if she were inhaling not just coffee, but the morning itself. "Something like that," she said in a tone that hinted at a smile, but behind it she felt a tension, something inexpressible. She worked in the research department of Nexus, in a division that almost no one knew anything about. Even its name sounded like something out of science fiction: cognitive architecture, next-generation interfaces, collective database optimization. These weren't just technologies, they were the future, which they were trying to piece together from the fragments of the present. Her team was working on creating a neural network based on collective consciousness, to combine the experience and memory of thousands into a single self-learning organism. It was majestic, strange, and a little scary. Kael knew only the broad outlines. She didn't tell him. She wasn't allowed to. The non-disclosure agreement at Nexus was almost sacred, and even his love, even their closeness, couldn't outweigh that invisible wall. But he guessed. He saw. Late at night, when the city fell silent and only the drones flickered like fireflies on the horizon, he would sometimes wake up. The light from her terminal cut through the darkness with a strip of cold blue. She sat hunched over, her eyes shining with fatigue, as if on the edge between the world of ideas and the abyss. On the screen were complex diagrams, like living organisms growing directly from her fingers. Diagrams, graphs, strange patterns, fractals, swirling like the mental dreams of machines. At moments like these, she was different, as if she did not belong entirely to this world. And he, lying in the dark, watching her, could not understand. Was there more madness or genius in her? Perhaps both. He never asked, never insisted. But sometimes a question arose in his mind. What if she really was creating something that would change everything? What if she stood on the border between human and superhuman? And then, would there be a place for him, an ordinary mortal, next to her in that future? She took the cup and cautiously sipped his witch's potion. She grimaced, her thin lips twitched, her eyes narrowed, as if she were tasting something wild, too alive, too real. But, as always, she took another sip, slowly, with ostentatious heroism. "We have a big breakthrough today. Or, a big failure," she said, not letting go of the cup. There was a fragile smile in her voice, but tension lurked in the corners of her eyes. "The line, as always, is thin. We are launching the main protocol. The first simulation of Anamnesis." She uttered the word, Anamnesis, almost in a whisper, like the name of an ancient deity that cannot be spoken aloud. And in that whisper there was awe, reverence, as if she were touching something greater than herself. Kael frowned. He had heard that word before. It was one of those scientific terms that concealed an abyss. "If it works," she continued, looking not at him but somewhere outside the window, where a morning patrol drone was slowly moving across the sky, "it will change everything. The way we learn, communicate, remember. Imagine, Kael, you won't have to dig through dusty archives anymore. You could just connect and feel what it was like to be an engineer on Helios 100 years ago. Experience his day, his hands, his fears." She finally turned to him, and something wild flashed in her eyes, the excitement of a pioneer, or a madman. They had always been close. "Feel," she repeated, almost in a whisper. "Not read, not simulate, but live." Kael slowly placed his cup on the table. "Sounds like a way to go mad," he muttered. "Or get lost. I prefer my memories to remain mine, and other people's behind a thick, clearly defined wall of encryption." She sighed, not out of irritation, but rather out of inevitability. It was their eternal argument, like an old, unhealed wound that they both returned to time and time again. His analog caution, his almost sacred fear of violating boundaries, versus her boundless faith in progress, in leaps and bounds, in merging. "You've always been like this," she said softly. "Cautious, earthbound, stubborn." She smiled, but there was warmth and forgiveness in that smile. "And maybe that's what keeps me afloat." But she fell silent, as if hesitating to continue. Kael felt the air grow slightly thicker. There was tension in it, like before a storm, still invisible but already close. "But?" he asked cautiously. She looked at him, long intently, as if trying to memorize every feature of his face, as if she were afraid of something. "It's just, if something goes wrong." He instantly stood up and approached her, cupping her face in his hands. Her skin was warm, alive. He made her look him in the eyes. "Hey, not if, when. You're the smartest woman on the planet. You make quantum clusters jealous. You'll be fine." She smiled, but it was a crooked smile, a forced smile, as if she already knew that something would not go according to plan. And yet she nodded. "Just, if everything suddenly falls apart, remember that I love you, no matter what. Promise." Kael squeezed her hands. Silently, his throat was dry, but he nodded. "I promise," he said quietly, and kissed her, first on the lips, then on her favorite freckles, on the constellations that always showed him the way back. "I love you too, more than real coffee." "That's a serious statement." She laughed, and the tension seemed to ease. She became his Elara again. "Okay, I have to go. Great things await." She quickly got dressed. A strict corporate suit made of smart fabric that adjusted itself to her figure and temperature. This image contrasted so sharply with her disheveled home appearance that Kael felt as if he had two Elaras. One was warm, imperfect, and alive. The other was cold, collected like a code. One was his. The other was for the rest of the world. "See you tonight. We'll order Chinese noodles. Real ones. From that shop in the old town," she said, throwing on her coat. "Deal," he nodded. "With beef and extra spicy sauce." "Exactly that." She looked at him, long intently, as if trying to memorize every feature of his face, as if she were afraid of something. "It's just, if something goes wrong." He instantly stood up and approached her, cupping her face in his hands. Her skin was warm, alive. He made her look him in the eyes. Hey, not if, when. You're the smartest woman on the planet. You make quantum clusters jealous. You'll be fine. She smiled, but it was a crooked smile. A forced smile. As if she already knew that something would not go according to plan. And yet she nodded. Just, if everything suddenly falls apart, remember that I love you, no matter what. Promise. Kael squeezed her hands. Silently, his throat was dry, but he nodded. I promise, he said quietly, and kissed her, first on the lips, then on her favorite freckles, on the constellations that always showed him the way back. I love you too, more than real coffee. That's a serious statement. She laughed, and the tension seemed to ease. She became his Elara again. Okay, I have to go. Great things await. She quickly got dressed. A strict corporate suit made of smart fabric that adjusted itself to her figure and temperature. This image contrasted so sharply with her disheveled home appearance that Kael felt as if he had two Elaras. One was warm, imperfect, and alive. The other was cold, collected like a code. One was his. The other was for the rest of the world. See you tonight. We'll order Chinese noodles. Real ones. From that shop in the old town, she said, throwing on her coat. Deal, he nodded. With beef and extra spicy sauce. Exactly that. She paused at the door for just a second, as if hesitating, wanting to add something. But she just stepped up to him and kissed him. Quickly, a little restrained, as if saying goodbye. The click of the smart lock sounded quieter than usual, like a sigh. Kael remained in silence. She was gone, and the air seemed to discharge, leaving behind a slight static crackle in his head. He stood there, feeling his loneliness fill the kitchen, like steam slowly dissipating in the morning sun. He finished his perfect, hand-brewed coffee. It was bitter as always, but the aftertaste was strangely sweet, almost cloying, as if it reminded him of something important that he hadn't yet understood. The clock on the wall flashed. 8:32. Time. Time to go. Time to dive into the world of the dead. He ran his hand over the tabletop, adjusted the slightly misaligned filter on the Chemex. An unnecessary, meaningless, but necessary movement. To delay the moment. To keep reality within its familiar boundaries. Because somewhere deep in his chest, anxiety began to stir. Shapeless, viscous, like a shadow creeping into the house through a crack under the door. He didn't know what exactly would change today, but he felt that something had already cracked. He walked into his office, a small, almost claustrophobic room that Elara always called the engine room, with feigned horror and secret admiration. And she was right. Everything here breathed iron and electricity. The walls were hidden behind racks of dense server blocks, covered with glowing symbols and labels, like tattoos on the body of an ancient cybernetic titan. The pale lights of the indicators flickered in the dim light, casting green-blue reflections on the ceiling, pulsing like veins. The air vibrated with the barely audible hum of the cooling systems, and this constant white noise was like a lullaby to Kael. He knew every frequency, every glitch, every breath of the machine by heart. In the center of the room stood his work chair, a massive structure made of carbon fiber, copper, and smart memory foam upholstery. It looked like something between a futuristic throne and an interrogation tool from a retrofuturistic movie. Immersion 7, the latest model, had built-in neurointerface support, sensory environment generators, and a gravity contour that allowed you to literally float in the data. Kael ran his fingers over the armrest. The smooth surface responded with a slight vibration. The machine recognized him, accepted him. He sat down, sinking deep into it like water, and the chair gently closed around his body, as if embracing him. There was a light, almost caressing compression on his back, shoulder, and the back of his head. The implant at his temple clicked into the port. Click, and the world began to fade. For a moment, he thought about how this cold, technological cocoon contrasted with the morning warmth of the kitchen. The smell of coffee, Elara's arms wrapped around him from behind. Something fluttered in his chest and disappeared, carried away by the flow of the incoming signal. Connection established. The The machines began to speak. The archives opened like the doors of ancient temples. It was time to take a leap into the abyss of other people's memories. Aura activate, he said into the void. Good morning, Kael, came the even, emotionless, perfectly calibrated female voice of his personal artificial intelligence in his head. Your biometric indicators are normal. Pulse 65. Cortisol level slightly elevated. I recommend a meditation session after work. Accepted. Aura. Destination. Helios Archive. Sector 73 Gamma. Loading data archaeology protocols. Let's go. The world dissolved. It didn't collapse or fade away. It dissolved, like ink in water. The smell of freshly ground coffee, the dull, soothing hum of the servers, the pressure of the chair against his back, all disappeared. Even the sensation of his own body, its weight, warmth, breath, evaporated as if it had never existed. In that second, Kael ceased to be human. He became a thought, a point without coordinates, a grain of consciousness thrown into absolute emptiness. And then an explosion. No sound, no light. A flash of pure knowledge. An all-consuming flood of meanings, data, connections. He dove into the sea of data. But it wasn't just a spectacle, not a visual stream in an interface. It was a complete, unconditional merger. A sensory revolution. In this space, the familiar laws of physics did not exist. Up was replaced by priorities, distance by logic, and weight by significance. For an unprepared mind, it would have been madness. But for Kael, it was like coming home. Chapter 2. It wasn't just an image projected into the brain, nor was it an interface in the usual sense. It was immersion, complete, irreversible, almost mystical. The sensory world as it had been before crumbled away, giving way to another reality. The sea of data had no top or bottom. There were no directions here, only interconnections. Everything obeyed a new logic. Significance pulled down, urgency pulled up, and proximity was measured by the number of associative nodes. It was an ocean of pure meaning, where gravity was replaced by relevance and distance by the number of logical connections. Ordinary consciousness, even slightly prepared, would crack here like glass under pressure. Instant, irreversible madness. But not Kael. He didn't float, he glided, absorbed, felt this world as his element, like a home where every drop of data echoed in the depths of his consciousness. Kael's consciousness, freed from the flesh, spread out into the sea like the finest network of senses. Almost alive, vibrating like a web stretched between points of meaning. He no longer saw information, sight would have been too crude a tool. He felt it. The archives, old and reliable, enveloped him in warmth. Like warm currents in the depths, heavy and slow. Their density was soothing. The damaged areas were different. They scratched his consciousness like icy reefs, sharp and treacherous, capable of wounding as badly as a physical blow. And at the edge of perception, shadows flashed. Fast, predatory. Viruses, protective algorithms. They could not be seen, only felt. Like the beating of someone else's presence. Like breathing underwater. They circled on the periphery like hungry predators. Waiting. He ignored them, moving toward his goal. The Helios crypt. He could feel it. A huge, ancient collection of data, archived more than a century ago. It felt like a sunken galleon resting at an unimaginable depth, covered in the silt of obsolete encryption protocols. Making contact with the archive, Aura reported. Her voice was background noise, part of his expanded consciousness, like a pilot's instrument panel. Data damage level, 7.3%. Structural integrity is 89%. Residual traces of the Cerberus 3.0 defense system have been detected. The system is inactive, but its subroutines could cause cascading errors if accessed carelessly. Roger, Kael replied, mentally checking the necessary boxes. We'll bypass Cerberus using the silent step protocol. I don't want any surprises. He moved cautiously, like a sapper over a minefield, unfolding a thin thread of consciousness to the outer shell of the archive. Where the data armor was welded together, he found a weak spot, a microscopic air bubble forgotten by the developers a century ago. Too much force, and the armor would collapse into a chaotic mess of bits. Too little, and it would slide across the smooth surface until the end of time. Kael chose the golden mean, light, almost gentle pressure. Click. The vulnerable port sighed like the lid of an ancient chest being opened. And Kael slipped inside, leaving behind a barely noticeable ripple echo so as not to wake the sleeping guards. The world changed not like a landscape but like a state of mind. In the blink of an eye, he was inside. Inside what resembled a majestic, silent cathedral, carved not from stone, but from code. The walls, rising into the digital sky, were tightly stacked with system logs. They stretched upward like the columns of an ancient temple, disappearing beyond the horizon of perception. Between them were stained glass windows, hexagonal matrices of financial reports, shimmering with all shades of green, like emerald ice flows in the sunlight. The air here was unbreathable, but it could be felt. It was heavy and dry, like in a vault that had not been opened for centuries. The smell was dusty, with notes of cooled silicon and rare sparks of burnt-out microchips. Everything was covered with a thin layer of time. No hustle and bustle, no streams. Only deep, motionless silence. Calm but not peaceful. The tranquility of a cemetery reigned here. Kael wasted no time. He knew why he had come. The manifesto, a single logistics file encrypted for a specific cycle. He began a sift search methodically, almost mechanically, filtering out everything unnecessary. Financial reports, internal correspondence, personal files, meeting minutes, drawings, even duty rosters and archived videograms. Millions of files passed through his perception. Millions of stories, destinies, fates, reduced to dry sequences of zeros and ones. And in this crypt, a digital sarcophagus of a bygone era, he was a necromancer. Not a magician, not a hero. An archaeologist on the other side of reality, searching for a single skeleton among billions of shadows. Time dissolved, losing its boundaries. Minutes or an eternity could have passed. Kael didn't know. His body, somewhere in the real world, was frozen in a chair, deprived of will, like a forgotten shell. But inside the cathedral, inside him, work was going on. Monotonous, precise, almost sacred. He sift-scanned the data levels, one after another, as if leafing through the pages of a huge, endless codex. His consciousness moved with impeccable precision, like the head of an old optical drive, dispassionately combing through arrays of information. He was almost there. He found the file, heavy, old, warped by time and bit erosion. The right markings, almost what he needed, almost, and that's why he noticed it. Not a glitch, not a broken cell, but a falsehood. No matter how boring and sterile the data was, here in the sea it formed a kind of symphony, a funeral march, rhythmic, mathematically precise. And this was a false note, a single alien note in the perfectly mournful song of the dead archive. Kael froze. At the periphery of his perception, a tiny flickering packet of information flashed. A barely perceptible pulsating glow, like a firefly in a dark dungeon. It was not part of the cathedral. It did not belong to Helios. It was encrypted using a completely different protocol, one unfamiliar to him. The protocol was alien, strange, distorted, unlike any of the schemes he knew. And yet, he could feel it, not as an object, but as a presence. It was warm, alive. Any other specialist would have closed their eyes, waved it away, called it background noise, a parasite, digital dirt. There were millions of such packets, fragments of glitches, traces of long-deleted processes. But Kael was not anyone. He was a perfectionist. He saw the anomaly as a sign. It demanded study. He delicately, almost tenderly, separated the packet from the surrounding array. Carefully, like an archaeologist probing an ancient artifact with a brush. And he touched it. Not physically, mentally. The contact did not occur at the level of protocol or code. It happened at the level of essence. And at that moment the package flashed. Not with light, not with information, but with feelings. The world changed. Everything disappeared, the cathedral, the archive, the data. Only the flash remained. A ray of sunlight fell on her face. She squints, wrinkles her nose, covers her eyes with her hand. He smiles. Her freckles are his little treasure. She hates them, but he kisses them again and again. Her laughter is light and sparkling, like silver bells at a Christmas fair. He blurts out something silly about coffee, as usual, and she laughs. Her voice, it doesn't sound. It vibrates inside him, in his chest, in his nerves. Just remember that I love you, no matter what. Promise. He knew it. He remembered. It was this morning. Her touch. Her voice. It was his life. But something was not quite right. It was as if the memory had been filtered, intensified, split in two. It became brighter, richer, more perfect than it could have been in reality. Like a painting with a digital mask superimposed on it. Painfully beautiful, but stripped of the rough edges of truth. There was no dust dancing in the sunbeam in the memory. There was no shadow of fatigue in her eyes. There was no distant hum of cars outside the window. It wasn't a memory. It was an illusion, an improved copy of her, an updated version of her. Too perfect, too clean, too unreal. Kael's consciousness flinched as if burned. He recoiled as if he had touched a raw nerve, and reality shattered. In the physical world, his body jerked as if struck by a weak electric shock. His fingers curled, the muscles in his back twitched convulsively. Somewhere on the periphery of his mental vision, the security system wailed a piercing red signal. He ignored it. His heart pounded in his chest with inhuman fury. Even here, even in a virtual projection, he could feel the blood pounding in his temples. His breathing was uneven, even though he wasn't really breathing. A wave rose within him, panic mixed with something else. Something that defied description. What was it? A psychotropic trap? A virus? But not at the code level, at the consciousness level. Something that penetrates not the system, but the operator's consciousness. Aura! He shouted mentally. His voice, honed by years of cool-headed work, was now on the verge of breaking. What was that? Last stream. Analysis. Immediately. Aura's voice responded instantly, even and smooth, as always. But Kael caught the pause. Not in the sound, in time. A microscopic delay, like a heart skipping a beat before a strike. It was as if even she, a super-precise digital intelligence, was trying to comprehend what she had seen. Analyzing, she said. No anomalies found in the structure of the Helios archive data. The packet you touched is not part of the archive. Its signature is unknown. It self-destructed immediately after contact with your consciousness. A possible cause is neural feedback caused by overload. Your biometric indicators show a surge of adrenaline and a disturbance in your heart rhythm. Her words were calm, flawless, logical, and that made it even scarier. It wasn't feedback, Kael snapped, his mental voice no longer trembling. On the contrary, it had become dangerously even, muffled, like a sound behind a locked door. It was my memory. Mine. From this morning. He could taste it, smell it, feel its warmth, as if it were happening all over again. As if he could still feel the taste of coffee on his lips, and her kiss. But this wasn't a normal memory. It seemed purified, boiled down to a sterile shine. It lacked the rough edges of reality, the unevenness of her intonation, the tiny wrinkle at the corner of her eye when she smiled, the noise of the fans outside the window, even the dust in the sunbeam. All of it was gone. All that remained was an idealized projection, like a photo that had been through 100 filters. More beautiful, brighter, but not real. He struggled with himself, searching for words, as if trying to gather the fragments of meaning from a broken mirror by touch. It was edited, he finally said. Inside, there was coldness and quiet horror. The impossible had crept into the system. And it hadn't just infiltrated, it had used his own memory as a carrier. Check the status of Elara Vance, he ordered, and the familiar firmness was back in his voice. My wife. Work terminal at Nexus. Current location by network ID. He already knew that something would be wrong. Somewhere deep inside, in the depths of his intuition, he felt that reality had cracked. But he hoped, pointlessly, stubbornly. The answer did not come immediately. The pause was short from the point of view of the outside world. But here, in digital space, it was unbearably long and felt like a silent abyss. In the sea of data, where processes are measured in femtoseconds, a whole second of silence seemed like an eternity. Kael felt the aura sending out requests, its tentacles penetrating the global network, querying, comparing, analyzing, sifting through trillions of records in search of the one and only. The search was total. He knew this was what happened when the system couldn't find what it needed to find in a nanosecond. He waited for the usual answer. Elara Vance is in her office. Or, signal detected in Sector Beta 3. Any response. The usual one. Instead, he got something else. Search complete, Aura finally said, and in her perfectly even, synthesized voice, Kael heard something new for the first time in 10 years of working together. Something that had never been there before and could never be. A glitch, not technical but logical. The sound of a program that produces a result that contradicts its own fundamental axiom. There are no records of a person named Elara Vance in the global network, and there never have been. The words were not a cry. They were silence, emptiness. They fell into Kael's consciousness like a stone into a bottomless well. He waited for an echo, but there was none. Error, Aura. His mental voice was surprisingly calm. The voice of a man talking to a malfunctioning machine that had just given him a live fish instead of coffee. Rescan. You misinterpreted the request. Use my personal identifiers. Marital status. Married. Spouse. Elara Vance. Identification number 730 Gamma Epsilon. It has to be in the network. He recited her number from memory without hesitation. His mind pulled the numbers from memory automatically. They were imprinted deeper than any passwords or protocols. He remembered it better than his own. He had entered it 1,000 times. When taking out insurance, buying tickets, filling out tax returns. Another pause. Aura went deep into the network structures again. He could feel it physically, like a spasm, like a pulsation in his temples. The system was straining, scanning, comparing. It was doing something it had never done before, straining all its resources. Kael, Aura's voice returned, and now there was a distinct note of confusion in it. It was as if the program had encountered an unsolvable paradox that threatened to cause a cascade failure. I searched all available archives, including government databases at the red level and historical records dating back to the digital reset. The identifier 730 Gamma Epsilon has not been assigned and has never been assigned to any citizen. Your personal data, both on the global network and in my local logs, stored since your activation, indicates marital status. Single. This status has not changed since your registration in the system. He did not immediately realize that he had stopped breathing. Single. The word fell into his consciousness like a block of ice into hot water. It didn't evoke any emotions, yet it just didn't fit. He looked at the word as one might look at a stranger's name accidentally displayed on one's door. But his thoughts were confused. Even here, even in the purity of digital consciousness, he stuttered. But what about the apartment? The contract? 2 names. Our joint accounts. Health insurance. He could hear how helpless his voice sounded. The arguments were irrefutable. Only, they didn't work. The lease for apartment 73-8B is in your name, Kael Vance. The reply was instantaneous. Polished. Dry. You have 1 bank account. Your health insurance covers 1 person. You have no legal or financial ties to an entity named Elara Vance. Nor have you ever had any. Flawless logic. Seamless. No gaps. And that made it scarier. Much scarier. If Aura was telling the truth, then who was the woman standing in his kitchen this morning wearing his t-shirt? Who was holding his hand? Who was drinking his coffee? Who kissed him goodbye? Something inside him broke. Not abruptly, but like glass under pressure. Slowly, with a quiet, drawn-out sound. Emergency termination of the session. Immediately, he ordered, his voice as firm as ice, hiding the boiling panic beneath it. Interrupting at this stage may damage the Helios archive and cause instability in your neurointerface. Aura replied in the same detached, unperturbed tone. I recommend completing the session according to standard protocol. Do it. The world of the data sea collapsed. It didn't disappear. It exploded inward, like a cavity deprived of pressure. The crack was not heard by his ears, but by the bones of his consciousness. A blinding flash, not of color, but of sensation. A sharp, cutting, ice-cold blade, a break in the flow, and behind it, pain. He screamed, no longer mentally. His body jerked as if struck by electricity. His fingers dug into the armrests of the chair, his skin instantly damp with sweat. His chest shook as he tried to regain his breath, which seemed forgotten. It smelled of sweat, ozone, and burnt microchip plastic. He was here, in his body, in the capsule. In reality, the world felt cramped and oppressive. He heard the monitoring system beeping above his ear, heard the chirping of emergency indicators, but his mind refused to focus. Everything seemed wrong. The chair, the leather, the sound. He was suffocating. Where was she? Kael tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't obey him. The neuroimmersion system hadn't completely shut down yet, and the impulses were confused. He collapsed to his knees, hitting his elbow painfully on the floor, but he didn't even notice. He groped around on the floor as if he could find something here, among the wires and cooling hoses. Her face, bright as the midday sun, still flashed on the internal screens of his mind. Her laughter, her scent, her love. It was real, he whispered. I felt it. I remember. It was real. But memory is stubborn, like a dream from which you have been torn. The more he tried to grasp the details, the faster they crumbled. As if they too were fake, a signature forged by a master. And yet, it was his. Chapter 3. He returned to his body with a cry. The jolt was physically painful, as if his soul, steamed in hot water, had been pulled out and thrown onto an icy stone. Cold. It hurt. He yanked the helmet off his head, not waiting for the manipulators to release the fasteners. Gel from the contacts splashed onto his neck and ran down his collar. Sticky, icy like slime. The air in the room greeted him with a musty, heavy smell. Dust, metal, plastic. He gulped it down, convulsively, like a drowning man who had emerged from black water. His lungs burned. His heart pounded in his chest as if trying to break free. He froze, clutching the armrests of the chair with his fingers, unable to move. The room floated before his eyes, defocused. Streaks of light and shadow danced, distorting the familiar interior beyond recognition. Voices echoed as if someone were whispering from afar, through a cotton partition. No, there were no voices, just noise in his head. It was a dream, he muttered. A neural glitch, a hallucination caused by an abnormal data packet. Just a glitch. He repeated it like a mantra, clinging to a rational explanation. He was a data archaeologist. His job was to extract logic from chaos, to tame data, to pull structure out of oblivion. And now his own mind had become a disordered archive, filled with corrupted blocks. He tried to stand up and almost fell. His knees buckled, his muscles trembled. He grabbed the edge of the table. His fingers turned white from the strain. The plastic under his palm was warm, like living skin. The world was still shaking, vibrating, as if reality hadn't fully loaded. But he began to make out shapes, a chair, a table, screens. The room was regaining its contours. And then his gaze fell on the corner of the table, and froze. There was a mug on the corner of the table. Her mug, white, with a peeling print of a cat in a spacesuit, frozen in a perpetually surprised expression. He remembered bringing it from the kitchen that morning, mechanically, without thinking, because he always put it right there. He forgot to put it away. Empty. Next to it was her scarf. The very same one. Long, ridiculous, knitted from thick yarn in an absurd purple color. Out of habit, he touched its tassels. Soft, real. He could feel them under his fingers, just like yesterday, when she wrapped herself in it, grumbling that she was cold again, even in the perfect climate. These were things. Physical, material things. They couldn't be imaginary. They couldn't be stored in memory and forgotten, erased. They were here. That meant she was here. And that meant that aura was wrong. 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 He exhaled with a sob, with a tremor, with a hoarseness on the verge of laughter and tears. His chest heaved convulsively, the skin on his neck damp with gel and sticky sweat. For a moment, everything inside him was flooded with relief, thick, warm, like hot wine. He laughed, short, uneven, almost hysterical. The laughter cut through the silence of the room like a blade. "It seems you owe me a full system diagnostic," he croaked, addressing the void in a voice that sounded foreign. "Serious problems with data access, girl." There was no answer. Of course, he was too used to her voice. He forgot that aura was part of his neurointerface. Outside of immersion, she was silent. He left the office as if in a dream, his legs feeling like cotton wool and his ears ringing. His fingers still felt the sticky yarn of the scarf, and he involuntarily clenched them into fists, as if he could squeeze the slipping reality. Everything in the living room was in place. Their sofa, covered with an old blanket with claw marks from the robot pet they never got. The holographic projector flashed blue in standby mode. On the coffee table were books, his popular science books, stories of digital empires, archaeology of neural networks, her monographs on string theory, heavy as bricks. Even the bookmark was sticking out in the same place as yesterday. Every little thing was proof, confirmation, reality. And yet, something was wrong. He felt it in the back of his head. A slight prick, an itchy feeling of shift, as if the wall had moved a millimeter to the side, and his eyes didn't catch it, but his body did. He looked up. There was a picture hanging on the wall above the sofa. Not their photo, not theirs. He took a step closer, stumbling. The painting was faceless, alien. A blue-gray abstraction, waves or mountains, or perhaps smoke above a dead city. Said nothing. No memory, no meaning. Just spots. He was seeing this painting for the first time in his life. But he knew there should be a photograph there. A large, bright, neon one. From New Shanghai. They laughed, soaked to the skin under the artificial rain. Her hair stuck to his cheek, and he looked at her, lovingly and foolishly. He remembered how they argued about whether it hung straight, how Elara brought a level and made him move the frame a millimeter back and forth. He even remembered how angry he was at the hole in the wall from the second nail. He rushed to the painting and tore it off the nail. The wall beneath it was smooth, too smooth, perfect. No trace, no dents, no scratches. As if the photograph had never hung there. As if nothing had been there. Panic swirled inside him like a whirlpool. His chest felt tight, his breath came in short gasps, like someone who had just realized they were running out of oxygen. Cold sweat broke out on his temples. He threw the picture aside without looking at it fall and rushed into the bedroom. The door swung open with a dull click. The light blurred, seeming too white, too even. Unreal. Her side of the bed was perfectly made. The sheet was stretched tight like in a hotel. The pillow was not flattened. There were no creases, no hint that anyone had slept here. Perfect symmetry. Dead symmetry. The nightstand was empty. Only his alarm clock was there. Not her quantum mechanics book with the dog-eared page. Not the mug she used to drink jasmine tea from in the mornings. Not the charging station for her tablet. It was as if her hand had never reached for it. As if she had never been there. He rushed to the bathroom. The shelf lined with jars and bottles always annoyed him. Her creams, essences, serums, bottles with meaningless names like Neuro Refresher. Now there was only his toothbrush, his deodorant, lonely objects arranged with military precision. like in a bachelor dormitory. He didn't want to go to the closet, but his legs were already moving on their own, like in a nightmare where it's impossible to stop. He knew what he would find, or rather what he wouldn't find, but he pulled the handle anyway. A jerk, a click. Inside, emptiness disguised as order. His shirts sorted by color. His suits all in their places. His old t-shirts, his favorite one with a retro game logo worn out but still intact. But there were gaps between the hangers. Excessive, as if a whole layer had been cut out of the closet. Her dresses should have been there. Cheerful, ridiculous. With owls. With a molecular pattern. Sweaters with deer. A woolen cardigan she used to flick his nose with. There was her old, worn-out Omnitech t-shirt which she wore as pajamas. Now it was empty. Just empty. He slammed the doors shut and slid down them, settling like a cut stalk. His back hit the wood, his chest trembled. His fingers trembled as if he had just experienced an electric shock. He clasped his head in his hands, clutching his hair. It wasn't just disappearance. It was destruction, sterilization. Not a bug, not a glitch. It was interference. Someone had come. Someone had entered his home, his head, and began to methodically erase it. But why? And how? It required resources that were only available to the government, a megacorporation. He jumped to his feet, staggering as if the ground had shifted beneath him. The world seemed blurred, like a smudged frame. Everything vibrated, breathing in time with his panic. His body was on autopilot, his brain still lost in the fog of shock. The office. Aura. Answers. He rushed there, almost falling on the turns, as if rushing to catch up with the slipping edge of reality. The chair spun around with a squeak. He grabbed the helmet and threw it on his head with trembling hands. The contacts clicked, coming to life. He pressed himself into the back of the chair, as if he wanted to sink through it. Aura. Activate, he cried. His voice broke, hoarse, as if it belonged to someone else. The world went dark, and then it flared up again, the cold, faceless interface of the sea. Everything around him became sharp and sterile, like an operating room. No smells, no taste, only absolute indifferent clarity. Recordings from the apartment's surveillance cameras for the last 12 hours, he demanded, almost without waiting for the full download. An instant pause, electronic breathing, processing. An image from the camera in the hallway appeared before his mind's eye. Here's the recording from this morning. 7:32. The frames unfolded before him, floating in the air like a memory come to life. The hallway, dim light, him, coming out of the bedroom, dressed, approaching the door, stopping. His lips move. He says something. To the void. See you tonight. We'll order Chinese noodles. Real ones. He smiles into space, leans over as if kissing someone. Then, nodding, he adds, it's a deal, and leaves. Kael stared at the screen and caught his breath. He was alone in the recording. He was talking to emptiness. He was kissing emptiness. Rewind, he gasped hoarsely. Last night, quickly. The images flashed across the screen, blurred from stress, but frighteningly clear in detail. There he was, coming home from work, alone, a plastic bag in his hand, his steps tired and automatic. The door slams shut into silence. He puts the container in the synthesizer and selects a portion. 1. The plate slides across the heated surface, and he sits down at the table without looking back. Alone. The next scene shows him on the sofa. His face is lit by the soft light of the screen, a mug in his hand. He laughs. He turns. He speaks into the void. He gestures toward where someone should be. But there is nothing there. The pillow is barely flattened. No trace. No hint. This is impossible. Kael croaked, recoiling from the screen. His palms were trembling, cold sweat clinging to his temples. This is fake. Someone edited the recordings. Someone erased her. Analysis of the video stream shows no signs of tampering. Aura replied evenly, without emotion. The file metadata confirms the authenticity. The hash sums match. These are the original recordings, Kael. He grabbed his head. Option A, he had gone mad. The most logical and the most terrifying. His brain, overloaded with work, stress, and sleepless nights, could have generated everything. A perfect hallucination, detailed down to the smell of her hair, the warmth of her hands. He loved the phantom. He lived with her. He slept next to her. He talked to her. But in reality, he ate alone and laughed into the void. Aura and the cameras only recorded the objective reality in which he was hopelessly alone. Option B, conspiracy. An incredibly complex, pervasive conspiracy. Someone kidnapped Elara and is erasing her not only from the network, but also from the physical world. They're not just deleting files. They're rewriting the very fabric of reality. But that was technologically impossible. It was magic. Kael breathed heavily. He needed a lead. Something real. Something that couldn't be erased from the network. Something that couldn't be rewritten. Outside the apartment. Outside Aura. Something real. Silas. The forgotten signal bar. Their place. Their refuge from the digital world. Where the walls were covered with analog photographs. Where implants were forbidden and names were memorized by ear, not through databases. Silas, old-fashioned and grumpy, remembered everyone who crossed his threshold. He had to remember. He was obliged to remember. This was Kael's last chance to prove to himself that he hadn't gone mad. His last foothold. End of session, he exhaled. The virtual interface crumbled like ashes. Kael jumped out of his chair, not noticing his knees shaking. He didn't change his clothes, he just rushed out in his t-shirt, pants, and almost barefoot, just so he wouldn't have to stop. The door swung open, and he rushed into the hallway, almost bumping into his robot neighbor, who was diligently watering a plastic orchid. "Good evening, Mr. Kael." A polite voice sounded behind him. He didn't answer. He was already rushing toward the exit, as if emptiness itself were chasing him. He didn't call a maglev. He ran to the old service elevators leading to the lower pedestrian levels. Kael stepped out into the night like a man thrown out of his own body. The door slammed behind him with a dry, hollow click, as if the lock had slammed not in the doorway, but inside him. He stood in the middle of the street, his fingers clutching at the air as if trying to grasp the slipping reality. The world around him continued to live on, lazily, mechanically. A patrol drone flew over the rooftops, flashed its red eye, and disappeared around the corner. A driverless car glided smoothly along the road, paying no attention to the man who no longer knew if he existed. He walked. Where to, it didn't matter. His legs carried him along the beaten path, to where there was still some chance of verification. He walked because to stop would mean admitting that everything he knew, everything he lived for, was fiction. A lie. A mistake of consciousness or a monstrous plan. He no longer knew which was worse. If they could erase her from the memories of others, what would be next? The streets they walked on would be forgotten. The apartment, the smell of her skin. Maybe even he himself would stop remembering. First her name, then her voice, then that she ever existed at all. He stopped at a glass display case, dark, out of order. His reflection stared back at him, unfamiliar, worn out, in a sweatshirt, with tousled hair and circles under his eyes. And there was something unnatural about this reflection, as if it appeared with a slight delay. Or perhaps it simply repeated the movement too accurately, too symmetrically. Kael slowly raised his hand and placed his palm against the glass. Cold. Real. "I'm not crazy," he whispered. "I remember her. I remember." But behind the glass, no one answered. The night city was shrouded in dampness and dim neon lights. The air was heavy, as if someone had sprayed fatigue over the streets. The streets slid under his feet, wet, empty. Kael walked quickly, almost running, clenching his fists as if that could keep reality from further disintegrating. The navigator was silent. He knew the way. The forgotten signal was hidden in an old neighborhood where automatic drones had long since stopped running and streetlights worked sporadically and on a whim. Above the rusty entrance, a sign flickered, with only answer remaining from forgotten, while signal burned like a warning. Kael pushed the door open. Inside, it smelled of alcohol, dust, and old wood. The warmth came not from climate control, but from incandescent lamps, human bodies, and memories. A vinyl record player hummed dully. The walls, hung with paper photos and yellowed posters, seemed to absorb time. There weren't many people at the bar. A few familiar faces, low voices, no cell service. There was no reception here, and that was the rule. He saw Silas right away. The bartender stood behind the counter, wiping a glass with a familiar motion. Kael stepped toward him, frozen somewhere between fear and hope. "Silas," he breathed. The old man raised his faded, tired eyes to him. There was nothing in them. No recognición, no surprise. Just the polite indifference of a bartender to a new, slightly crazy customer. "Bad day, kid?" he croaked. "What'll you have to fix it?" Kael's last support cracked and collapsed into the abyss with a deafening crash. It was an excerpt from the novel The Man Who Wasn't.